The Shift is brought to you by SE Healthcare. Welcome to The Shift. I'm Dr. Andrea Coyle. Shifties, welcome back to the next episode of the Shift podcast. Just want to let everyone know that September is National Suicide Awareness and National Suicide Prevention Month. We're going to really use this medium this month to talk to a lot of great leaders. We're going to have some up close and personal stories. And to kick off the month, I have the great Dr. Bob Dent with me. As you recall, he came on the podcast probably back in December, shared a really great story about himself. We're going to talk about his story. We're going to go through a couple of things that I think are really important. I'll share a little bit of my story, and we will take it from there. Shifties. Bob, welcome back. So good to see you.
It's good to see you again, Andrea, and I appreciate you inviting me back. You know, this topic of suicide prevention and awareness, it's deeply personal, for me. And I hope the conversation that we have today offers encouragement, hope, and some practical tools that our listeners may be struggling or supporting someone who may. For years, I wore the mask of a healthcare executive, a nurse executive, while silently battling chronic suicidality. There were some pretty dark times when I truly didn't believe that I would survive. And I even survived multiple suicide attempts. But I'm grateful every day that I did, because it allows me then to share, this story with others who may be feeling the same way I once did. When you think about the shift and, what changed my life, that shift for me was finally being honest and open, first with my wife, and then seeking the professional help that I really needed. That included, once talking to my team, but then entering into a residential treatment facility, getting the therapy that I needed, medications at the time to move me out of that sort of crisis situation. And then, that commitment to self-care, it all became part of my healing process. And honestly, really, that's what saved my life. So what I want to say here, two things. Maybe if you're struggling, know this: speaking up is not a weakness. It's really survival. It is strength. And recognize, too, that the healing process is not linear. There are setbacks, and there's also progress. And today, for the first time really in decades, I feel hope. And so it's a good feeling.
Bob, I'm so glad that you're bringing hope to me, to the listeners, and to this whole, everything that's in this space. I shared with you, Bob, that probably 15 years ago, and time flies, I worked night shift. I had two young kids at home, and I was getting my master's degree, and I felt so incredibly overwhelmed. I started having trouble sleeping. I started suffering from anxiety, and there were days I woke up that I felt like I couldn't go on. And I think that the thing that I struggled with the most, Bob, is I was afraid to ask for help, and I didn't know how to ask for help. Can you share with the shifties a couple of things: self-care and self-help, and then how do you ask for help?
Yeah, that's very important. And I appreciate you sharing that story. And we've had conversations about that a little bit in the past as well. And it's important. I think one of the things, and I think we talked about this even in our December podcast, when you said, Bob, we need to name it, aim it, or claim it, and then tame it. Name it, claim it, tame it. Right.
That's right.
And I had mentioned then that I don't know if I've quite tamed it yet. I feel like I'm in a better spot, now 6-7 months later. But I would say, first is name it, don't numb it. And so when you think about naming it, not numbing it, I think those feelings that we tend to push down or distract ourselves, we need to pause and really name what we're experiencing. I feel anxious, I feel hopeless, whatever I'm feeling, and recognize that emotion is emotion. There's no real bad in that, and unless there's something that you do with it. But to be able to name your emotion, that actually creates that gap. And I think with that gap, then that's where healing begins. That's the shift that we're looking for whenever we're able to name it, not numb it, and then be able to claim it, that gap. The second thing I would say here is it's the kind of the connection rule, or the one connection rule. And each day, I think reaching out to somebody, that could be a simple text message. It could be my spouse, or it could be a partner, a colleague, a friend, or even a text check-in. Isolation tends to fuel despair. Connection builds that sort of hope. And that took me a long time to really think through that sort of connection, and being able to share. We don't have to solve everything, and we don't have to walk through all of these things alone either. So I think it's important to be able to recognize those things. And I think the third thing here, Andrea, would be kind of those micro recharge rituals that we can have. That's taking 5 to 10 minutes. Step outside for fresh air, pray, breathe. And for me as a nurse leader too, one of the things that I always found when I found myself getting somewhat distressed or being in that sort of mode is just go out rounding. And so I like to, it's one of those connections, and it's a recharge ritual. So out rounding and seeing people and talking to see all the good things that are happening. And again, all those small shifts, they add up, and really get you out of that dark space. And if we can make it through that dark space, then it's a better space to be in.
Oh my gosh, I smiled when you said you would go out and round, because when you go out and round, you think about that human experience. That's why we all got into healthcare, is we love the human experience. And I remember feeling sometimes overwhelmed. And one thing that really put some energy or a pep back in my step was going out and making those connections. So
Mhm.
thank you for saying that. That's incredibly important. Talk about, other than the things you just mentioned, there's self-care and there's self-help. What's the difference between self-care and self-help?
So yeah, self-care are those things, and I think we've got to learn how to do that better. As leaders, we're always taking on more and more, and especially nurse leaders, and to be able to practice that, so those sort of self-care kinds of things, that is a very important. But for me, when you think about self-help, it took me years to think through what that might look like. And I thought by not receiving the help that I need, it would make me, if I did receive help, it would make me look weak. And so I did not seek help, and I delayed my care. And if only the kinds of things that I knew now later in my life and my career, if I were to say, okay, I'm not in a good space now, and that could have been 20 decades ago, right? So decades ago, if I would have just sought the help that I needed then because it wasn't right, um, I'd be much further along in my journey, recognizing again that healing is not linear, and we can make that. And so whether it's a therapist, a physician, an EAP program, which is very important, clergy, or your spiritual self, or even calling 988, I think all of those are important steps whenever you're not feeling your best self, and recognize that it's okay to not be okay, and to receive help is a very strong indicator of receiving that help. And again, doing it now, not waiting for that.
So well said. Self-help is picking up and calling and saying, I'm not myself right now. I need help. And it can be as easy as a friend. I have a couple of
Mhm.
friends. I have an incredible friend. She's a shifty. If something's not feeling right, I will text her and say, do you have 15 minutes? I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm not feeling right about something. And it's incredibly helpful. The other thing, Bob, I was thinking about, as a leader and everything that you've learned on your journey, your mental health journey, what are some tips on creating a psychologically safe and emotionally safe environment?
Yeah, that's important. And I'll give you I'm going to go back one right quick and say, that reaching out to a friend. So I like to play racket sports. And so last Thursday night, I was on the court and playing pickleball. And I got into some what I would think would be friendly banter with a colleague of mine who's a psychologist, on the pickleball court. And after I left, I thought, well, maybe my banter went a little too far, and began to ruminate about that. And anybody that is somewhat over controlled, or has those sorts of tendencies, can really think through that way too much. Historically, I would have just continued to ruminate on that. My distress levels would go higher, and I would spiral somewhat out of control and end up in some sort of crisis. But that night, when I got home, I told my wife, I said, hey, this is what happened on the pickleball court, and this is what I'm feeling right now. And she said, well, that's a great progress in all of this. And so she said, maybe you're just overthinking it. He's a friend of mine. I talked to him on over the weekend, and we're actually going to help somebody move this week. And so it wasn't that big of a deal, but just reaching out, like you said, to a friend in that case. But when you think about trauma-informed care and setting up psychologically and emotionally safe places for people to practice, being a leader and modeling that sort of vulnerability, that you don't have to, you don't really have to overshare, but you can say, I've had tough days too, and normalize that sort of conversation, and understand that the burdens that people may have could be invisible burdens. We just don't see them. And so how do we set up these psychologically and emotionally safe spaces in a trauma-informed way? Again, modeling that sort of vulnerability. I think zero tolerance, for bullying and incivility. We talk about that in building a culture of ownership in healthcare, and others, and recognize toxic emotional negativity is a top reason why people want to leave work. And multiple or many conversations I've had with nurses and nurse leaders over the course of my career would talk about why they wanted to leave, and it was around some of these sorts of behaviors. And I think the third thing here would be doing regular mental health check-ins with your team. And so at the beginning of a meeting or at the beginning of a huddle, just to say, how are you? And it's not just a casual, how are you, but how are you really? And you can even put that on a scale of, 1 to 5, how present are you right now? And not passing judgment or bias or any of those kinds of things, but how are you really? I'll never forget, I was doing a workshop with a healthcare organization, and going through a lot of these sorts of things around the mask I wore and this journey around mental health. And one of the leaders in the room, she raised her hand to tell a story. She said, I kept walking by this desk, and it was an ambulatory clinic. I kept walking by this desk, and I noticed this nurse who recently came back from leave. She was sitting down. She looked depressed, and she was writing in a journal and didn't think anything of it. And she, just kept noticing, day after day. And she finally approached her and said, tell me what's going on, or how are you doing? Only to find out that in that journal that she was writing in was her suicide note. And it was in that suicide note, but the fact that she asked her, because being aware and creating those kind of check-ins, she was able to get her the help she needed through the EAP program, and saved a life. And I think as nurse leaders, when we think about the sort of environment that we want to create and live it, and to be able to recognize that some of these burdens that people are carrying may be invisible, and you've got to understand what's happening right now to be able to save that life.
How are you?
Mm-hmm.
3 powerful words. And I recall, and I've shared this with you, and some of the shifties know this as well. I really had a rough couple of years, had a lot going on personally. And there was a time when a dear colleague said, how are you, Andrea? And I just started sobbing.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 cheers, kudos, much love to Dr. Ecoy Rooney, who is a shifty, who asked me that question, because she opened the door for me to be vulnerable. She created that psychologically safe environment where I could say how I was feeling. There was no judgment. I was vulnerable. And those 3 words, how are you, are incredibly powerful. And they do create that psychologically safe environment. Um, Bob, if we could, number one, just remind everybody out there that this is the month for us to really take heed. We've got to make changes. We've got to take care of each other. We've got to take care of ourselves. We must create these cultures. If you could, Bob, say, what do you think from your personal and professional perspective? What is the call to action for everyone listening to this call?
Yeah, that's an important question to ask there. I think first, for our listeners, if you feel like your story is over, I want you to know that it isn't. Um, and there are many people who are struggling, and I recognize that, and I know that, and I want them to know that their story is not over. There is more life, ahead. You're not alone in any of this. And so whenever you reach out and speak up and recognize there is hope, there is hope here. I think practicing that self-care or, from that self-help and self-care, really diving into what that really means so you can preserve, that hope and work through it. And then become more informed and educated around what it really means to create psychologically and emotionally safe spaces. There's a lot of really good work that's being disseminated and how we can do that, recognizing, and it's always been one of my mantras and part of my leadership philosophy, people first, safety always. And so as we develop those trusting relationships with our people, then you can create those psychologically, emotionally safe spaces for people to speak up and get the help that they need. So those are just some of the top of mind things there.
I love your call to action, especially when you said we have to educate ourselves. We have to continue to educate ourselves. I want to do a couple big shout outs. First of all, big shout out, Bob. What is your wife's name?
Karen.
Big shout out to Karen. Karen is amazing. So a lot of love and appreciation for Karen. Number two, big shout out to the American Psychiatric Nurse Association, Lisa Wynn and team, Dr. Lisa Wynn and team. Thank you for all you do. Any shout outs that you can think of, Bob?
Yes. Really all the nurse leaders, I know they're carrying a heavy burden caring for people, and there's so much pressure on people. So yeah, I have it's been a passion of mine for 35 plus years and creating helping people. So, I shout out to our nurse leaders.
I agree with that. Nurse leaders have such a tough role. And so thank you for all that you do. The other call to action is this month, during this incredibly important month, I'm going to encourage everyone to go out and ask a peer, how are you? Leaders, ask someone on your team, how are you? And then I'm going to throw this out there for everyone that's listening. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm just going to throw it out there that Dr. Bob Dent and myself are really passionate in this space of mental health. We are more than happy to have discussions with each and every one of you because we want to make sure that people understand the vulnerability in saying it's okay not to be okay. Mm-hmm. We want to share our experiences. Bob has an incredible story to tell. I'm sure we all have stories to tell. So reach out to us, reach out to the American Psychiatric Nurse Association, reach out to your EAP. Anyone else they can reach out to, Bob? I've missed so many people.
There are professional associations like NAMI and SAMHSA that are there to be able to support. And really, if you're in crisis, call 988 and to be able to get yourself out of that sort of crisis mode.
Bob, I want to thank you again. I thank you so much for being such a great leader, so vulnerable, sharing your story, making a difference, making a shift. And would love for you to come back and hook up with us on LinkedIn. You can always connect with us on LinkedIn. But Shifties, remember, your shift makes a difference. Keep shifting. Enjoying the shift? Help us reach more nurse leaders by rating and reviewing us on your podcast app. It takes just a minute, but makes a big impact. Search for The Shift tap those stars, and share what you love. Your feedback shapes our future episodes and helps others discover us. Remember, rate, review, and amplify the shift today.